Welcome everyone to our side event on green, resilient and inclusive development in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. This side event is part of the regional climate weeks that are being hosted by the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And we expect the deliberations from our discussions over the next 1 hour to feed into the ministerial process of ministerial dialogues that will go up to COP26 later this year. My name is Nanki Kaur, and I will be your moderator for today. We have a great production team that's helped to put this event together, and all 4 of them will be here with us today to facilitate the session. In terms of housekeeping, you will be familiar with most of the requests living in a virtual world for over almost 2 years now. But we'll request you to please keep your cameras off and your microphones off. This session itself is an informal session, so we are going to be using a chat style throughout. And I'd like to encourage you all to please put your questions into the chat box. And I'd also request all the speakers to please keep checking the chat box and respond to questions and use that as a mode of interaction as well. So without further ado, I'd like to start our session. And to introduce the session, we've got the slide, and which you've all seen the event flyer as well. Once again, this is a session on green, resilient and inclusive development in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. I'm going to refer to this as GRID in terms of an abbreviation, but GRID is a discourse that's gaining increasing traction in the context of aligning COVID recovery measures with climate action. And a number of our member countries and development partners like the World Bank, which is hosting this theme, is taking this discourse and this terminology forward as we design our recovery programs or our next actions. So over the next hour, what we're going to do is focus on what is happening in terms of green, resilient and inclusive development in our region, and how can we unlock these opportunities over the next few years. We have an excellent and gender balanced panel here with us today. To start us off in terms of the keynote speech, we have Pradyumna and Deepshika, both from ICIMOD, and they will provide an overview of climate action in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, and also an early analysis of what our member countries are doing in terms of COVID recovery. From that, we are going to move more into a panel discussion, and our panelists are going to unpack some of these opportunities in greater detail. So we'll be joined by Arun and Sunita, also from ICIMOD. They'll be focusing much more on how investments in nature-based solutions can leverage opportunities for green, resilient and inclusive development. Then colleagues Bidya and Asad, they'll focus more on green investment in green infrastructure. And finally, we'll be joined by our colleague Prem from the Bank of Bhutan, and he'll be speaking on the all-important topic of finance and how we can align financial systems behind a green, resilient and inclusive recovery. Our session, to conclude our session, will be joined by Isabella, and she'll provide some reflections on the way forward in this space. So to start us off, Udayan, can we have the context slide? I am also going to provide a context for this presentation. So for those of you who are not familiar about the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, this is a large region, and it spans over 8 countries all the way from Afghanistan down to Myanmar. And as you can see in this slide, it provides a significant amount of ecosystem services to almost 240 million people who live in the mountains, and about 1.9 billion who live downstream. So in fact, it's known as the third pole because it has the largest amount of ice outside the 2 polar regions. It is home to 10 of the major Asian river systems, and because of this, I think at ICIMOD we refer to the Hindu Kush Himalaya region as the pulse of the planet. But unfortunately for our region, this is also facing, it really is at the front line of the climate emergency. So even if we consider the 1.5-degree goal, which is what the Paris Agreement is aspiring towards, for our region, an increase in temperature by 1.5 degrees is also too hot. It will result in a loss of ice and glacial volume. And as we know, the impact of that is quite significant: flooding and an increase in climate-induced disasters, some of which our region is already facing. And that then has an impact on lives and livelihoods. So because of this context, the need to focus on ambitious action in our region is really, really critical. And in this session, we are going to look at how, if we can align COVID recovery measures with climate action, whether that alignment helps us unlock opportunities for a more green, a more resilient, and a more inclusive future in the mountain region. So with that, I'd like to invite our first keynote speaker, Pradyumna. The screen is yours, and Pradyumna has been doing some analysis of the climate actions in our 8 member countries. So Pradyumna, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nanki, for the introduction and for setting the stage by providing a background on the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, its significance to the region, but also globally, and also the climate emergency at hand. A very good afternoon to everyone. With the background that has been provided, we have been looking into and analyzing national level documents submitted to the UNFCCC and climate-related policies, strategies, and documents of our 8 regional member countries. This is to better understand what the countries are doing in the face of this climate emergency and what their climate priorities are. To begin, a rigorous review of these documents have been done, which you can see in the screen. These are the national determined contributions and national communications that have been submitted to the UNFCCC, but also climate-related policies, strategies, and action plans, and other relevant documents to climate change. As we are all aware that to meet the Paris goal, there are 3 important components. That is the mitigation goal, the adaptation goal, and aligning finances to achieve these goals. So looking into the mitigation priorities and targets of our regional member countries, it is quite evident that we can see that a large number of targets are based on energy and energy infrastructure, followed by land use, land cover change, and by transportation. To give you an example of what these targets say, like for instance, for energy infrastructure, they mainly talk about the use of renewable production and use of renewable energy as a primary source of energy, but also increasing energy efficiency in different sectors. Similarly, into adaptation priorities within the region, we can see that agriculture, water, forest and biodiversity, and disaster risk reduction are some areas all our countries have emphasized their focus on. To give you an example of some of the priorities in terms of agriculture would be to have resilience in agriculture through improved terracing, for instance, in the terms of the mountain context, use of drip irrigation in water scarce and arid regions in the mountains, but also like disaster risk reduction. Example would be to set up early warning systems and infrastructure in terms of shelters. To meet, as I mentioned earlier, to meet both of these goals, of course, there is a lot of finance and other terms of supports like technical assistance that is required. These are some of the financial requirements that have been mentioned in the nationally determined contributions of the regional member countries that can be seen in the graph in front of you. And why it is important is that because if we go through the nationally determined contributions that have been submitted, that in case of at least most of the countries that have submitted some of the other targets, they are conditioned to external support. The external support could be in terms of finance, technological transfer, or capacity building. So it is a vital element in achieving both mitigation and adaptation targets. Moving on, our countries have been working towards aligning financial flows to meet these targets. For instance, you can see in this table, there are fiscal measures in place, there are certain funds have been established, and there are some innovative financial instruments that have all been set up to actually finance climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Like for example, in terms of fiscal measure, you can see that Bangladesh and Nepal do have some form of fiscal framework at the national level, whereas in terms of established funds to tackle climate change and to move around the funds, Bangladesh and Bhutan do have dedicated funds looking into climate change. In terms of innovative financial instruments, 4 of our regional member countries, you can see, do have something already in place in terms of green bonds, or it may be equity or loans, whereas the other 4 countries are in process of coming up with similar instruments. Now, doing analysis of the documents and looking into the regional climate priorities of our countries, what we can see is that as climate change is not just a national issue, but it crosses across boundaries and requires cooperation and collaborative efforts to mitigate and to adapt to them. So our analysis shows that broadly we can see that countries are mostly talking about 3 to 4 areas in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and finance, where we see an area of convergence for possible regional cooperation. These 4 categories are resilient infrastructure, nature-based solutions, disaster risk reduction, and scaled-up finance, because finance is something in most of the climate documents and in most discussions that countries have been asking for the availability and mobilization of finance. In continuation, in regards to areas of cooperation, there are certain areas that the countries in their documents have already also mentioned, may it be in their policies or in their nationally determined contributions. Some areas, these areas are like disaster risk reduction, data sharing and knowledge sharing, glacial monitoring, and also capacity building. And with this, I mean, I would like to conclude my presentation and on the climate action, and would like to invite Deepshika to tell us about her findings regarding COVID and the green, resilient, and inclusive development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pradyumna, for setting the context and insights into the climate action by our member countries in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region and also the area of convergence. Thank you, Nanki, for the overall view. And hello, everyone, for joining us from different time zones. I would like to focus towards how our member countries are focusing towards post-pandemic green, resilient, inclusive development, also known as GRID. As we all know, COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented health, economic, and social crisis. It is not only threatening the lives and the livelihoods of millions, but also has continued to increase the poverty, inequality, and reversing the development gains. Post reviewing the country's strategies and COVID recovery plans, it can be seen, as already mentioned by Nanki in the introduction, that GRID is discourse put forward by our regional member countries and multilaterals, ADB, World Bank, etc. And the goal is to align them with SDGs as well as the climate goals related to or under the Paris Agreement. Pradyumna, next slide, please. I would like to mention about the 3 key ambitions of the proposed approach under the GRID, which is first is lowering the emissions, which will lead to the green recovery, then enhancing the resilience in all the sectors, towards the inclusive development via green growth or job creations. These are the main 3 key ambitions towards the structure of GRID. To achieve the GRID, all our HKH member countries are aligning the COVID recovery plans with climate mitigation, adaptation, social welfare measures, along with sustainable finance or the green finance, which is directed towards regional cooperation, which can enable us and speed up the action in the region with a response, recovery, and redesign mode. Yeah, thank you. In terms of policy and investment opportunities, the HKH member countries are focused on key sectors that can deliver the GRID. Some of the prioritized sectors by the regional member countries are resilient infrastructure, clean energy transitions, nature-based solution, and so on and so forth. The key measures to get the GRID by our regional member countries are response, recovery, and redesign. So if we focus on response, the response is any kind of emergency measures in a short term or a short span of time, which is to address the concern that have directly emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic and may be included as forced action. Recovery, however, is more of the socioeconomic measures which are characterized by medium-term outcomes or aligning recovery measures with an environmental and climate focus to build back better from COVID-19. So I was emphasizing more on build back better and usually involves the planned intentional action. The third response in terms of is the redesign, which is characterized by outcomes in a longer span of time, which can be few years to few decades, and will also bring the paradigm shift in the growth models and transformation towards redesigning current socioeconomic, sociocultural systems to be resilient and sustainable. However, our emphasis should be through grid approach, we should emphasize more on the response and the recovery phases. Now, when we look at this particular slide, it is again a slide of areas of convergence as already mentioned by Pradyumna in the climate action plans. As mentioned, these also highlights the mitigation adaptation along with social welfare, sustainable green finance, and cooperation are the baseline for the grid in our regional member countries. When we talk about mitigation, some of the very prominent sectors are, of course, one is the resilient infrastructure. So it is both vertical as well as cross-cutting sector. Transition to renewable energy, sustainable transportation, and other sectors like agriculture, health sectors, water and wastewater. When we go to the adaptation and social welfare schemes, we are looking through the lens of the policy planning and vulnerability, which will definitely involve social welfare schemes like enhancing employment opportunities, governance, skill development or capacity building, and also moving towards resilient startups, innovation in smart and green technology. Looking in terms of finance, we are talking about sustainable or green finance, which will have the policies and instruments in place. Like, for example, we have the various national multilaterals, which are coming with the finance for the post-pandemic recovery packages, which will also help the green economic stimulus and will be also derived towards public-private market mechanisms and carbon pricing. Very important and is looking at the cooperation, which is towards both international and regional. And it can be looked into both in terms of physical and technical. I would just like to give few examples here. For example, China in the latest strategy in terms of mitigation is focusing towards building resilient infrastructure against natural disasters. They have also established environmental dedicated fund for green investment, which is approximately 12.6 billion USD in Yangtze River economic belt for various activities like pollution control, clean energy, transportation, which is mainly a recovery measure. Now, if we look at some of the few other examples in terms of adaptations, Nepal, for example, a province level green recovery which is providing jobs to hundreds of people to plant trees during the quarantine, is an immediate response. Similarly, in Pakistan, Green Economic Stimulus Plan is launched by Ministry of Climate Change aimed to promote environmental activities with economic impacts. Bhutan has focused a lot on the adaptation and social welfare. India in the recent budget has also looked into response and recovery, allocated around 2.6 billion for rural broadband connectivity. So these are just of the few examples. Hence, after this, I would just like to conclude that it is very important that our HKH member countries have imbibe the grid approach and can also enhance international and regional cooperation, either via fiscal measures or technical cooperation for green growth to promote livelihoods across our region, which is also very gender sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepshika, and thank you, Pradyumna, for providing a great summary of what our countries are doing in terms of climate action and also what they're putting forward in terms of their COVID recovery measures. What I noted was more in terms of the areas that you've identified in terms of convergence between climate measures and COVID recovery measures. And I think this is also what our next panel is really going to focus on. So the top three that I've noted in terms of where countries are putting forward similar measures is one around nature-based solutions, one around investing in resilient infrastructure to lower emissions, to create jobs, and to ensure ecosystem restoration, and also quite a few priorities on green finance. So these are areas that I think we're going to now move into the panel to discuss in detail. And with this, I'd like to invite our first panelists to put their cameras on, and that would be Arun and Sunita. Arun and Sunita are going to be speaking to us about nature-based solutions and how investments in nature-based solutions can unlock opportunities for green, resilient, and inclusive development. As we've heard, Arun, Sunita, this is one of the most prioritized areas when it comes to countries and their climate action plans. And we are also seeing this emerge quite significantly in COVID recovery measures, be it Pakistan's 100 billion tree program, which aims at creating jobs for people who've been impacted by COVID, but also restoring the ecosystem. So, Arun, the first question is really to you. We've discussed this quite often, and when we are talking about nature-based solutions, they are obviously solutions that rely on nature. And a lot of people have often said that nature-based solutions need to be specific to our mountain region. So could you help unpack that a bit more? What are the critical natural assets in our region, and how do they contribute to resilience or growth in our region?
Thank you, Nanki. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Definitely a pleasure to speak in front of you and try to answer your question. You know, not going into a lot of detail, Nanki, I think you have given the context quite well, which kind of answers your question, the first question, what are the natural assets, right? So I'll go very briefly on that and then come back to nature-based solutions, which might be, you know, according to our, you know, kind of discussion related to, you know, the grid principles. So we talked about the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, the topography, right? And just would like to add, the climate is also quite unique here, the summer monsoon and westerly, bringing in the moisture, both in liquid and solid form, nurturing snow and glacier. Just wanted to add a number here that the amount of ice stored in our region is estimated around 6,000 cubic kilometer. And just to give an idea, this amount is equivalent to global irrigation water use, annual, you know, 3 times the global annual irrigation water use. That means our ice and snow can actually irrigate the whole world 3 times, 3 years, right? So I think that gives an perspective. And of course, you know, the irrigation system in this region are kind of like occupying 40% of the global irrigation system. And first, second, and fourth largest irrigation systems in the world are in this region, like China, India, and Pakistan. And this system actually provides 70% of the region's food production. So the important as a natural asset, I think it is quite you know, quite significant. To go on a little bit further, I think, you know, the water, particularly water generated from this region, can actually you know, generate, has a potential to generate around 300 megawatt of installed capacity of hydropower, but out of which only a fraction has been tapped. My colleague Sunita will talk more, but this region is so very much, you know, rich in biodiversity, 4 out of 34 global biodiversity hotspot here, and a number of Ramsar site, World Heritage sites, etc., etc. But then those, you know, assets, water, energy, food, and ecosystem actually exist in a very strong nexus, right? And what is happening because of climate change is this nexus is kind of disrupting. And also COVID is contributing to that. So when we talk about nature-based solution, I think we have to really see as solutions, you know, not in a traditional manner that we are thinking of, we used to think of, but also solution which of course has to be based on nature in some regards, but should go beyond that. And I think there is a growing consensus that when we talk about nature-based solution, it has to actually contribute to greenhouse gas mitigation. It has to contribute to climate change adaptation. It has to have a strong, decentralized, if I may, decentralized governance system, including very strong ownership and governance of communities. So the control from central mechanism actually is less, and it has quite a lot of autonomy by itself. And also, if the situation, the condition actually are conducive, this solution can actually turn into disruptive solutions, actually could be game changer, which can actually break that change of control and provide, in a sense, autonomy or, democratization. I think I just want to cite example of this, ride sharing systems, which actually disrupts the whole control mechanism, of transportation system. But that's not the talk of my what I'm going to talk. I just would like to talk about a few examples of nature-based solution which can actually address what I mentioned earlier: greenhouse gas, mitigation and adaptation, governance, decentralized governance system. From our example, which we have been, doing in this region, from ICIMOD, I would like to just cite a few examples, and then I will have to pass to Sunita. Water scarcity because of climate change, glacier change, changing hydrological regime is very, very big issue right now. So one solution that we have been successfully practicing is, especially in arid Western Himalayan region, is irrigation water management package of solution. Just very briefly, it helps getting better access to water through certain technology, very simple, like hydroram pumps and solar pumps. It includes efficient distribution mechanism, and added onto it is high value agriculture system. So this package becomes a little bit innovative, and actually, and with very strong community ownership, it becomes very successful in meeting. The second example is about a little bit about this service from nature, about floods. Community-based flood early warning system is a simple technology, but it relies on 4 pillars, not only on technology, which is scoping, implementing, communication, and response mechanism, right? And again, very strong community involvement with very strong upstream, downstream linkage is crucial to the success of this system. And the last one I would cite is the 6-step spring revival methodology, which actually is very important for mid-hills where water is not drawn from cryosphere or meltwater. So this involves 6 steps like mapping, monitoring, social governance aspect, hydrogeological investigation, implementation, and monitoring. Again, very strong community involvement. So these 3 examples, I think, are kind of nature-based solution which we have been practicing very successful, and also the interest to outscale and upscale is quite great in this region. And as I said, if we can create a conducive environment, catalytic environment, these very simple, systems, methods can actually turn into a disruptive solution, which can actually change the whole mechanism, break all the barriers, and create, solutions which can be, what we call the grid solution. So I'll end there. I think we have limited time, and hand it over to Sunita.
Thank you, Arun. Thanks for helping to unpack what these natural assets are in the Himalayan region, and also then what kind of solutions we can design based on these natural assets. So Sunita, coming to you, you've been doing some really interesting analysis in our region to see that, of course, nature-based solutions are a buzzword, but I think you've also been trying to analyze to what extent COVID recovery measures are supportive of nature-based solutions, and by being supportive, whether they do actually unlock these opportunities for a more green or a resilient or a more inclusive world. So Sunita, if you could spend about 2 minutes to give us a bit of a insight into what.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Nanki, so much. Thank you, Oranji, Pradyumna, and also Dipsika. Just building on what have already been shared. So I'll just focus on the question that Nanki has asked me, how the COVID recovery packages really support the NBS in the region. So I think the HKH region, the 8 countries have been very active and have already policies, some strategy and plans in the place, which really support NBS, such as green infrastructure, biodiversity conservation, and also green growth in terms of jobs. So here, what I have done is trying to just give examples, adding on previous examples. For Afghanistan, these are some selected examples. Like for Afghanistan, the country really has secured 122 million grant, which really focuses on solar energy power, transportation, water, agriculture, and protected areas. And if we see to Bangladesh, Bangladesh has been very proactive at the national scale, and the parliament has already granted like 12.50 billion just to mitigate focus on climate actions, especially focusing on, if you see, restoration, protected areas, but also on conservations, which are really nature-based solutions just to promote the growth in the country. And if we see Bhutan, Bhutan is already very active in so many conservation initiatives. But if we see, they already have response plan of around 40 billion that really focuses on hydropower, sustainable hydropower, and organic agriculture. But if we see, I will not repeat what Sika said, that China has been very, very proactive in biodiversity conservation and trying to advocate environmental conservation. And they have like chunk of money invested in like restoration, pollution, energy, and the green transportation. But at the same time, the other countries like India has been very proactive. Like they already have 817 million US dollars focused on forest management and green infrastructure only. And they already have like targeting on biodiversity targets and focusing on OECM, which means that other effective area-based conservation. Similarly, Myanmar, though politically unstable and it has some internal issues, but they have been also very proactive in nature-based tourism, especially on wetlands, and also green jobs for youth, as also for the women and the green entrepreneurship. They are promoting like that. And also in addition to provincial level activities, Nepal has 3R plan. We are saying relief, recovery, and resilience plan that really focuses on green growth, job creation on 4 major sectors, I would say: agriculture, forestry, biodiversity, and water sector. And Pakistan, all of you know, they have been very proactive and really focuses on restoration and protected area management. With this, we can see that the region is really in a good pathway, but there are some challenges. What we have been trying to analyze is that there are challenges. All these plans are very sectoral and needs a lot of integration into sectoral analysis and integration at the local and the regional scale. So they can contribute to different sectors, like Nanki already said, to the climate conservation, but also development, which are very inclusive and just for all for development of our region. So I would say that this recovery is a generation opportunity for us, not only to plan, but also to show the outcomes that are very green for us and also for our children, the future generation. Thank you. I'm happy to respond to the questions, Nanki.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you, Arun. I just want to stop here and say that I think we've been joined by more than 100 participants. And I am going to encourage all the participants to please put your questions into the chat box and ask our speakers to respond to them. So while we've heard some interesting things around nature-based solutions, you might also want to ask Sunita whether it's all positive, because there are some measures, for example, some of our countries as part of their COVID recovery, also backtracking on, they're putting money in, but they're backtracking when it comes to regulatory instruments in terms of environmental and social safeguards. So those sort of conversations, I encourage you to please start asking in the chat box. And with that, I would like to move to our next panelists. So Arun and Sunita, thank you once again. If you could put your cameras off, and I'd like to invite Asad and Vidya to join us next. They'll be speaking on the other prioritized area in climate action and COVID recovery plans, and that is on resilient infrastructure. So as you saw, our countries, again, infrastructure is one of the first go-to places when you want to focus on job creation. But our countries are also focusing on infrastructure in terms of green infrastructure to reduce emissions, but also restore ecosystems. And some of the areas of infrastructure prioritized include renewable energy, transport, there's quite a lot in the building and construction sector. And I think, Vidya, that is the one where both of you are coming in, and we've been doing some really exciting work in this space around clean bricks. So, Vidya, my first question is to you in terms of the challenges and opportunities in the building or construction sector in the Hindu Kush Himalaya. Can you give us a bit of a context of what's happening in this sector? Thanks.
Thank you, Nanki, and hello to everyone, and good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are joining this virtual program. So, I mean, just wanted to give a very, very old example when we are talking about resilient infrastructure before going to the opportunities that my colleague Asad will be coming in for that. So, you must have all heard, or maybe you must have read to your children also about a very old fable about three pigs. So to cut short the story, there were three pigs, and one built the house of straw and the other with the wood, and the last one with the brick. So when the big hungry wolf came, then it was able to blow the straw house and also the wood one too. And both the pigs ran to the brick house where they were safe because the wolf could not blow the brick house. So this is a very old story that I just wanted to relate with the resilient infrastructure. So in the nutshell, it's all about resilient infrastructure means like making the structures for people that remain intact when disaster strikes. And with this growing urbanization and with the increasing demand of the houses, bricks has been one of the very essential building materials and preferred by most of the consumers, not only in the cities, but you can even see that the thatched and wood house in the hills and the mountains are being rapidly replaced by the brick houses, which you must have been all observing while you are going visiting the hilly areas and the mountain areas. Though, the inner structure they keep intact, but the outer structure they want to build in a more resilient way. So maybe my colleague Asad will highlight more on the green buildings now.
Okay. So what I was saying, like history of the bricks basically dates back to 7000 BC, which makes them one of the oldest known building materials. And innumerable structures like the Great Wall, Maya Devi Temple consist of brick structure. So brick used in sustainable buildings can provide structure, finish, acoustic comfort, thermal comfort, good indoor air quality, fire resistance, impact resistance, and durability all in one product. So being green and resilient are two different concepts, but they go both hand in hand. But however, in most of the South Asian countries, the process of making bricks is not sustainable and that much green. So the construction industries are polluting our environment to produce construction materials and depleting the natural resources. A general question which comes to mind though, will our future generations have enough natural resources in order to make ingredients for the construction of homes, offices, and other infrastructures? This is a big challenge to preserve construction materials for future generation. Most of the governments in South Asia are looking into ways to introduce new means and methods of constructing buildings, as many of the SDGs like 3, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 15, and 17 are associated with it, with the construction industries, and promote building material which have low carbon footprint. So I'll be closing my statement for the first question over here.
Thank you, Asad. I'm sorry you were having some technical problems, but we can hear you now. Vidya and Asad, I think the reason once again, just to say that we were focusing on the sectors, also to acknowledge that we are having rapid urbanization in the mountain region. And like you said, bricks and mortar play a large role in that. And in terms of the production of bricks currently, they are considered quite dirty, high emitting, and not very socially just either. So with that, Vidya, if you could just spend, please, just a short while. You are doing some exciting work, Asad, and you on this Clean Bricks initiative. So if you could please quickly tell us a bit about it and how you think that really creates opportunities for lower emissions, for a more socially just workforce, and a more resilient future. Thanks.
Thank you, Nanki. Just to give a brief that, in South Asia, there are more than 150,000 brick kilns, and they are producing approximately 300 billion bricks annually. And usually these are produced in the traditional kiln, which is known as fixed chimney bull trench kiln. In short, it's called FCBTK, and you can see predominantly in South Asia. And they are very energy intensive and polluting, emitting around 120 million tons of CO2. This was the calculation done. And this affects local environment, most of you have already aware, and also the communities, but also gradually impacts the regional air quality, even contributing to melting of glaciers. So bricks, though the product is resilient building material, the way it is produced was not very much green. So owing to this importance of the sector, ICIMOD began its journey in 2013 to make this sector more environment friendly and energy efficient. And to this, 2015 earthquake in Nepal played as a very catalyst role on this, as all the kilns were down and need to be rebuilt. So with the persistent intervention with the kiln owners, all the kilns of Kathmandu Valley was built into zigzag kilns, which reduce around 15% of CO2, 40% of particulate matter, and 60% of black carbon. This also reduced coal consumption by 20% and produced even better quality bricks. And to say that zigzag is not the cleanest technology, but just converting all the kilns of South Asia, because this is very much to the traditional kiln, the zigzag kilns, would itself reduce approximately around 50 to 20 million tons of CO2, which will definitely, will contribute in keeping the temperature below 1.5 degrees. And, we are still working to make this process green. Like we introduced technical improvement and innovations in the production, like substituting of coal with biomass pellet, initial firing, replacing firewood with LPG gas, which reduce around 15 to 80% of CO2 respectively. And these measures has not only reduced the energy cost, but also it utilized the waste, reuse of the waste, and also renewable materials like the plant waste, the biomass waste, and also increased in the profit of the owners.
Vidya, thanks. If you could start wrapping up, please.
Thank you. And one of the laudable, transboundary cooperation in this volatile region was to bring in, together the brick entrepreneurs from Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India together to a common platform so that they can work together. It's called Federation of Asian Brick Kiln Association. And the other milestone was we are able to, venture into the delicate territory, like child labor, bonded labor, and one of the most achieved thing was we were able to, convince the Brick Kiln Association to internalize the social code of conduct. And to this, we have been also scaling up activities in Pakistan, where Asad will elaborate more on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. I think we're already over time for this session. So Asad, if you could please come in, but keep it brief. Thank you.
Yeah, less than a minute for sure. So as rightly said by Vidya, that within a period of 3 years, Pakistan brick industry basically achieved a milestone from 0 to more than 7,000 zigzag kilns, with the continuous support from ICIMOD and Nepal entrepreneurs, the government of Pakistan too banned operation of the traditional kilns and approved a 6% subsidized loan from the State Bank of Pakistan for the kiln conversions. And this supports Pakistan NDC goals, which is significant as country is the third largest brick producer in Asia after China and India. And due to the socioeconomic development which is taking place in Hindu Kush Himalaya region, most of the governments in South Asia have announced affordable housing to poor. For example, in India, we have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and similarly Naya Pakistan Housing Program and in Ashrayan in Bangladesh. So due to the aforementioned interventions, brick industry offered employment opportunities for the marginalized communities, even in the pandemic situation. So still a lot to be done in the sector. For example, promoting alternate building material, automation, smart mechanisms, alternate sources of energy and raw materials, tunnel kilns. So and then similarly, all these things are going to be embedded in the seismic code of the Pakistan, which was also developed after the earthquake, and that is going to give the legal backing to the building codes, energy conservation, and the seismic code as well. So we would like to thank CCAC, FCDO, and UN Environment for the support extended, and there is a long way to go, and together we can achieve a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad, and thank you, Bidya. I think what I'll keep in mind is the 20 million tons of CO2 reduction, the potential from this. And Asad, thank you for really giving locating this example in actual work and how Pakistan, for example, is subsidizing the shift to a zigzag technology. Thank you for that. And with this, I'm going to request our last panelist to join us. And I'm sure this is a topic that a lot of us are interested in. It's all very well to say we should invest in nature-based solutions or we should invest in green infrastructure. But Mr. Mukhtan, who's going to join us from the Bank of Bangladesh, is actually going to talk about how are we going to actually align our financial systems behind green, resilient, and inclusive development. Prem, welcome to the panel. And just to start us off, I think this is a recognition that finance is a really important topic. And we know that currently in terms of finance, the projections by the IPCC themselves say that we need about 1.6 to 3.8 trillion US dollars is needed for this 1.5 degree world. And the amount of climate finance is nowhere near this figure. And if you look at the finance that's coming to our region in the mountains, it's even less. So my first question to you, coming from a financial institution, is why do you think it's important to align financial flows with green, resilient, and inclusive development?
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure for me to be part of these discussions today. The environmental safety and the sustainability has been there for a long, but it has not really worked the way we like to be working for us. Now it is we are getting towards making this green and sustainable economy as an important aspect of our activities. But if you look at the statistics, especially given by Asian Development Bank, the global investment in renewable energy and sustainability has decreased by 3% in 2017, which is a bit worrying for every one of us. Similarly, just now, as you have said, if you look at the overall investment, the budget for 2017 and 2018 was 574, and only 5% of that, which is around about 35 billion, has been towards HKH regions. This is also a little bit worrying for us because if you look at the overall populations that has been impacted by the climate change, we have around about 2 billion populations there. So the demand is changing, but the investment is not really changing. Investment increase has not happened really, but the demand for resources, demand for climate change activities is increasing now. Now, as you said that we require at least $4 trillion to mitigate the climate change in the overall world. But, just 5% of the $4 trillion is going to be just $200 billion. Is $200 billion is going to be sufficient for us? This is the questions that we may have to ask ourselves and look how we can go forward. Now, if you look at the overall populations impacted by the climate change in our region, it is 2 billion. You translate that into overall populations, probably it is 30% of the overall populations in the world. Now, 30% of the populations, 30% of the 4 trillion, at least we require $1.2 trillion for mitigations of the climate in our regions only. So what I feel is there is some issue with our way of doing the things. There has to be paradigm shift in terms of the way we are doing the business. Now, the way we are doing the business and way we are financing the business is the important aspect that we need to look into it. That is the area where we have to really attract the investments into the business. Now, in order to change the way we do the business, probably we may have to change the way we finance the business. So in order to change the way we finance the business, probably we may have to change overall financial systems in our regions only. For example, the financial systems in our region is not really going green, because the greening of the financial system itself is most important before we green other sector. The reason why I'm saying is this just because the financial sector is a center of business and the development. So the green and the sustainable development is possible only when we reallocate the resources meaningfully. So it is the responsibility of actually the financial sector to reallocate the resources meaningfully, because there is always disconnect between the self-interest and the common goods. So we need to really look into green finance initiatives shift to bring into equality of deployment of the resources, reallocations of the resources, capital, investment, and so forth.
Thank you.
Look at
Prem, I'm going to move on to your next question because we have 2 more with you and we are also running short of time.
Okay.
So if I may sort of, I think you've provided a really good background of why we need to align our financial systems, but also now moving into what the Bank of Bhutan is doing, because I think you're doing some really interesting, putting in place some very interesting measures which give others some concrete idea of what needs to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. I would very quickly touch upon what we are trying to do in Bhutan and as well as the Bank of Bhutan. Our country development philosophy is based on the gross national happiness. As you all know that we have 4 pillars. Out of 4 pillars, one of the pillars is the conservation of the environment. Under conservation of the environment, we have the ecological diversity and the resilience. The other one is the community vitality. Now, based on this, now how to mandate this to the institutions as well as to the individual people in the country. So it has been very clearly enshrined in our constitutions in the article number 5 regarding the environment conservations, to mandate each and every individual people, individual citizens, as well as the company, institutions, NGOs, and government in the country to follow these mandates. So based on this, we thought that the Bank of Bhutan is most important sector as a financial sector. We are center of the business. We need to do something on this green finance strategic direction. So what we did was we started G-shape accreditations to build the green finance capability among ourselves, because first we need to build the capacity in order to attract the green finance fund. So we also signed MOU with the WWF and Department of Renewable Energy very recently for promoting the energy efficiency measures. And also BOB corporate building was identified as the WWF next 5th iconic building in the world for energy efficiency building, because we need to show example to ourselves saying that we are serious about the green and sustainable business. And also we are in touch of in touch with the central bank very recently. Just a couple of days back, I had a meeting with the central bank, and they are also working towards formulating the green finance regulations as well as green finance investment guidelines for us. So we are changing our corporate strategic plan for 2024 for changing the sustainable portfolio for example, certain percentage of the portfolio has to be in our balance sheet of the bank. And also we are, we have established dedicated team to take this measure forward. Now, we also trying to green ourselves. We have a certain green innovative financial solutions, green EMB, that is especially for the transport sector. We have already introduced, and we have financed couple of electric vehicle, and then government has already installed the free electric vehicle charging stations for 5 years, and probably government will install around about 200 across the country within 2022. And we also have a green home loan, basically aligned with the GCF, the 8 strategic key result area. We have a green education loan, especially for those people pursuing the educations in green and sustainable educations. And we have Green Road. Green Road, basically, it is nothing but the greening of our overall thing. And we also have an agricultural loan and green tourism.
Thank you, Prem. I think you've come up to your last slide, and I just want to touch base with some of the exciting work that you're doing and what Pradyumna also presented. I think it's exciting to see a lot of our countries, including Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, thinking about green financing frameworks, which is something similar I noted from your presentation. Prem, to end it off, you've in our discussion you've been talking about what Bhutan is doing and what the bank is doing, but sort of a paradigm shift in the financial system obviously needs broader action. And I think in these next few slides you're going to tell us a bit about what are the challenges and what, from your perspective, you think the rest of the financial sector should be thinking about to achieve this realignment of the financial sector.
Thank you. Of course, there are a lot of challenges that we are facing in terms of going green. The absence of the reliable green finance policy framework, we need to have a very strong and reliable policy framework, which is not there in the country, as well as we need to build the industry expert to understand and harmonize the different rules and regulations across the sector. And there is also a technology risk where innovations in the green technologies is not happening much in our country as well as around the region. So we need to encourage the people to come up with the green technology as well as use this green technology. And also the most important is basically the financial institutions to mitigate the risks, credit risks. We always look for the past data, historical data, and to learn from the past, the success and failure of the initiative. But here in the green initiative, this data is missing there. We are not having any data for the past to understand and learn from the past mistake. And also the very interesting thing is that green finance has a very long payback period. So there is always a maturity mismatch in terms of the liquidity and cash inflow, because we don't know the future cost of the present decisions that we are making. This is also risk for the bank at present. So we need to build a certain type of business model to understand this, so that there will be a certain measures to understand this. Also, in terms of opportunities and all those things, probably we need to have a green lending and a green project, taxonomy to have a very clear structured way of doing the things. Also, there has to be some sort of regulations for the bank, which the central bank is coming. They will probably by end of 2020, they will come up with the regulations to monitor the carbon footprint of the loans and investment given by the banks. And we need to have a very strong incentive for a green interest rate for the low carbon activities. Also, we need to reduce the risk weight for the green assets, basically the loans and advances, in order to reduce the rate of interest. And green qualified collateral against the brown qualified collateral, we need to segregate very clearly which are qualified for the green collateral, which are not qualified, and which are brown collateral. And also, we feel that the environmental and climate risks guideline has to be very strong in each and every financial institutions in the sector to make the credit risk assessment stronger.
Prem, thank you so much for that. this last slide to me is very impactful, and I think we've all looked at the 100+ participants. A lot of us are more from the sort of development side of things, and I think this really brings home that if we want to get more investment in a green and resilient world, then these are some of the things that we really need to also start thinking of, because finance plays such a critical role in this transition. So thank you very, very much for that. And thank you to all our panelists for helping flesh out some of these key priorities that our countries have been putting forward in terms of nature-based solutions or investing in resilient infrastructure, and also the fundamental question of how we are going to align our financial system behind this transition. So with this, I'd like to conclude our panel session. And I thank you everybody for staying on for an extra few minutes. I'd like to invite our last speaker, Isabella, to conclude the session with some reflections on the way forward. Isabella, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Nanki, and thank you for a fascinating set of issues that were raised today. I also learned a lot, but really what struck me were that there are some really important opportunities for us moving forwards in the HKH region. And I really want to just focus on 3 areas in my concluding remarks. We haven't got much time, so I will be brief. So 3 concluding points. Firstly, it's without a shadow of a doubt, the value of the HKH region is enormous. We heard about that through the various speakers, and that there is a really important opportunity that we must grasp now to protect these values and build on them. And that opportunity has never been better than it is now. We have climate finance, we have the recovery process, we have hugely important international processes happening this year, such as COP26 and the United Nations Food Systems Summit. Internationally, there is a wave of change, a recognition that we cannot any longer continue business as usual. And I think today we've heard around some really interesting means and ways of how we could protect the values of these really important assets. But I think what is unique, moving to my second point, what is very unique about the HKH is that to move forwards and protect the values and also mitigate the risks that we've also heard about, such as from floods and droughts, is that we need a collaborative and a cooperative approach moving forwards. Whether it's managing the upstream, downstream water dynamic that we heard from Aaron and the value it holds to irrigation, or whether it's managing air pollution and the impacts on health. And of course, air pollution does not stop at a border, it moves across borders. So the importance of regional cooperation has really struck me as well today. And thirdly, in terms of moving forward, as I said, we've got a very important opportunity now to really scale up our efforts and finance and transform the way that finance is invested. Yes, there are challenges, but we also have some solutions on the table. And I think the slides from the last speaker speak to some of the possible areas which we could invest further in. And if I just could raise a few that we know could be delivered in the shorter to medium term. And one is around disaster risk reduction, disasters cross borders. We have the digital and the data revolution. How can we use this revolution to really improve regional knowledge and data exchange on disasters, which have huge costs and huge impacts on livelihoods and lives lost. Secondly, we have the issue of resilient enterprises. We have some knowledge on how to take that forward. Tourism is a critical sector right across the Hindu Kush Himalaya. How can we make that sector more resilient? We heard also about the importance of technology and technology transfer. How can we bring in new innovations, invest in new innovations, but also bring in new ideas, new innovations from other regions and apply them locally. And finally, a big challenge, but I think it was very clearly mentioned in the last slide, this issue of how do we create the right incentives to deliver these green and climate finance frameworks. How can we look at cost benefit analysis differently? How can we look at discount rates differently? These are fundamental, essential issues that we need to tackle moving forward for a greener and more inclusive development for the Hindu Kush Himalaya. Thank you all. I'll hand over back to you now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. And thank you to everybody who's joined us. Like I said, Udayan, I think over 150 people at one stage. Thank you very much for staying almost 10 minutes extra and for contributing to this discussion. At ICIMOD, we'd be very happy to work with all of you to take these messages up to COP26. We do have a campaign which we are referring to as the HKH to Glasgow campaign. So please do connect with us and let's all promote ambitious climate action in our region and really dedicate our working and personal life to making sure we are able to address the climate emergency over the next decade. So thank you once again, and I shall conclude the session here. Thank you.